G'day and welcome to Pellowe Talk. And today we've got a very special Pellowe Talk live panel for you. I want to welcome to the show Ben Davis, who's in the top right. Give us a wave, Ben. Ben is the editor-in-chief of Cauldron Pool, a new media website changing the world, much loathed by radical leftists as all kinds of defamatory, untrue comments, which is exactly the right type of person to annoy. Somebody else who is getting under the skin of people in the Twitter sphere is James Macpherson beneath Ben. Say hello, James.
Hey, David. Good to see you.
James is former pastor of an Australian megachurch, Calvary, and had, 7 locations before you handed it on?
9, actually.
Nine. I did you a disservice, but he's also a journalist, writes brilliant pieces for The Australian from time to time. And we also have Pastor Mark Powell. Hi, Mark. Welcome.
G'day.
Mark is a Presbyterian pastor of Cornerstone. Oh, I've got a Skype call coming in. That's pretty rare. Sorry about that. Where's your congregation, Mark? I think it's Strathfield. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's Strathfield in Sydney.
So it's 1 Queenslander versus 3 Sydney boys today. So although a former Queenslander, I'll claim you to even out things, James, if that's all right with you.
No, I was actually born in Wagga Wagga, so I'm staying with New South Wales.
Oh, no. Okay, well, commiserations on the long history of state of origin losses, everyone.
You had to bring that up.
If you're watching, we want to welcome you to the show. We want you to say g'day, tell us where you're watching from, and make sure you join in with questions and comments at any stage so that you can be included in this live panel. So first off, let's have a chat about this. Who's behind who? The World Health Organization. Mark, you wrote this article. One of the most significant revelations to arise out of COVID-19 is the World Health Organization's relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. In a stunning Facebook post, Martin Iles has had some interesting things to say. Why don't you go through that with us, if you'd like, Mark?
Yeah, look, I just think this is stunning. I wrote an article for The Spectator just a day or so ago, as well as Cauldron Pool, looking at this particular angle. And I called it, who's behind who, or even like who's behind the Wuhan virus, because to me, the significant thing here is the links between WHO and the CCP. I think that's really significant. And it's not just the relationship. I think that smelt fishy, and I'm not just talking about the fish markets in Wuhan.
Yeah.
I think what's particularly fishy is really the leadership of WHO and how they could be being influenced by the CCP. And the revelations that Martin Niles has made, and he's not alone. I don't see, Martin as being a right-wing extremist or anything like that. I think he's right down the middle.
Correct.
For the life of me, I cannot see why the mainstream media in Australia are not reporting on this. That to me is just as significant. Donald Trump has said that, America is going to look at pulling their funding from WHO.
Yeah, it's done.
So I think that's a risky call, but again, I think it's a gutsy call. And I think it's like he did with South Korea. I think he's calling China's bluff. And that's not been done before or recently in my time on the world stage. So, COVID-19 is unprecedented for health, but we're living in a surreal time for what this means for Australian life and even global politics.
James, what do you think? Is pulling funding from WHO a risky move, and is COVID-19 unprecedented for health?
What a surprise to find that WHO is a mouthpiece for the Communist Party in China. But isn't that true of every United Nations department? They are funded by the West, typically to undermine the West. Just look at most of the votes regarding Israel in the United Nations. So whilst disappointing, the revelation that WHO continually espouses Chinese propaganda is hardly surprising, sadly. I think that Donald Trump is absolutely right to pull funding from WHO, and people are getting all upset because I think it was Bill Gates who said this is not the time to pull funding from the WHO when we're in the middle of a major health crisis. Well, the WHO haven't done much to help the health crisis to this point. It's pretty much a nation for themselves. In fact, that's one of the great lessons to come out of this. For all the globalists talk of, nations working together and a global community, then we have a flu, and suddenly the global community is nowhere to be seen. It's every nation for themselves. And thank God we live in a Western democracy where we have typically good government. We have prosperous economies where we are well able to look after ourselves, because this has just proved again, when you're in trouble, don't look to people in the EU or worse in the United Nations to look after you. It's every country for themselves, and thank God that we live in a good country.
Can I just jump in there and make a comment? Because I agree with everything James has said. And one of the things, I really respect about James, I take it you're also a former journalist. And I respect that, because I know that you're across your brief, you're across world politics. My thing is, I don't think the average Aussie is as aware of those sort of things as you are. We tend to trust WHO, that they'll do the right thing. We tend to, just like, take, for instance, another big media topic at the moment, the ABC, and I think it's witch hunt against George Pell. Most Australians would like to think, although I don't think they think this anymore, that the ABC represents all Australians, but they don't. They're a left-wing, I think largely anti-Christian media platform that's funded to a tune of $1 billion a year by the Australian taxpayer. This is where I think, can I just say too, and I'm covering a lot of topics here, I think Ben's site of Cauldron Pool plays a pivotal role in that it's keeping the media honest. This is what the internet does. It democratizes the media, and it gives the normal punter a chance to be able to have their voice heard. And I think what really stinks, for instance, about the ABC is that conservatives are frozen out of that platform. If you're Christian or you're political conservative, you don't get a go. And I think Australians deeply resent that. Australian culture is based largely on a fair go, and I think that's what's missing in the current media climate.
I think that's obviously true about the ABC, but probably needs to be taken with the context that it's not universally true. There are some presenters and employees of the ABC who will try and bring some balance and try and be objective. But I think it's predominantly true that the ABC, especially in the editorial staff, are overwhelmingly unrepresentative of the political views of mainstream Australia, that they're overwhelmingly, disproportionately representative of extreme left political views. Ben, let's bring you into the conversation. What's the worst case scenario if Australia, America, the 10 biggest contributors to the funding of the World Health Organization suddenly say, you guys are manifestly incompetent until you change all of your leadership, which is obviously corrupt and unreliable. You're not getting another dollar from us.
Yeah, I think the whole situation has kind of highlighted the effectiveness of their sort of propaganda arm, the ability to influence the way that the average Australian or just the average person thinks when they think about the World Health Organization. You hear of Trump cutting funding, and one of the first reactions you'll get from people is, well, don't you care about the health of people? Don't you care that they're helping people. And I think it kind of goes to show just how there is just this broad tactic that is used by so many people where they can frame almost sinister actions, sinister things in positive and almost Christian language of helping and social justice type rhetoric that people just buy into. And they think, if I oppose this particular organization whose stated goals are seemingly Christian at face value, then am I going against something that's good, something that's helpful and beneficial? So I think that what we're doing as well is just trying to inform people that sometimes the language they use is often used to cloak something a little more sinister, or something that at least they don't want us to see. So so it's imperative to kind of pull back that rhetoric and get down to what's really going on, which I think Mark has brilliantly done today in this piece he's published.
Let's have a look at the Director General of the World Health Organization, and he said that communities are fully engaged, communities are fully educated, engaged, and empowered to adjust to the new norm. Every country should implement a comprehensive set of measures to slow down COVID-19 transmission and save lives, with the aim of reaching a steady state of low level or no transmission. Dr. Tedros. James, you quoted Dr. Tedros and the World Health Organization and observed, when a UN agency offers to educate you, they mean indoctrinate you. When a UN agency offers to empower you, they mean restrict your freedom. When a UN agency tells you to adjust to the new norm, you've just encountered something scarier than coronavirus. Do you want to enlarge on your thoughts there?
That's the great thing about tweets. You don't need to say any more.
If you had more than 240 characters.
Look, whenever the state says we need to educate people, I get very afraid, because no education is value neutral. The state always come with a set of values, and the values espoused by the United Nations are typically quite frightening. When the United Nations talks about empowering you, the United Nations never empowers. The United Nations simply tries to gain more power over sovereign nation states. And once they get power, they never relinquish it, which is one of the interesting things we may get to talk about today, is the way that, because of this health crisis, we as the public are stampeding to give the government more power over our lives, which makes sense to try to bring this epidemic under control. But it must always be remembered, it's a rare day when the state, having been given power, then gives it back. That's something we'll keep in mind. And of course, one thing that really frightens me is when the United Nations talks about a new normal. The last organization in the world I would want defining as what should be normal is the UN.
Yeah, correct. One of the quotes Mark actually brought to my attention in recent discussions, and there's lots of opportunities to use right now, is a quote by Ronald Reagan, which was, "There's nothing that lasts longer than a temporary government program." So a very, very good man. So Nev Harris says, "Don't bite the hand that feeds you. This will cause the WHO to rethink their methodology. USA is not being bad here. They will fund a better model."
Look, the thing about the UN and the United Nations and America is that, and you've got a feel for America here, America typically provide most of the funding and then are treated like a pariah or the great Satan. You can hardly blame the US for saying, we want value for our money, we don't feel like we're getting it, therefore we're withdrawing our funding. They never get thanked for what they do, but the moment they say, hey, we're not happy with the way our money's being spent, suddenly they're the great pariah. It's incredibly unfair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think James is spot on there. That's exactly right.
Have they done anything positive, anything praiseworthy during this whole thing? I know they came out early on and they criticized people for using racist words to describe the virus, but in your opinion, have they done anything well?
Yeah, I think, Ben, you've nailed it in one. The great contribution the World Health Organization has made has been to our language. They have helped us to speak in acceptable ways, and we should all be grateful for their guidance in the way that we speak.
George Orwell would be pleased.
Yeah.
So, what's their greatest contribution? That's scary what you just said there, James. I think, again, you're right. What they've done is they've changed the narrative. They've taken it from the Wuhan flu to, even more derogatory forms, which I thought Australians would jump onto, like the Wu flu, or something like that, to now we've got this generic COVID-19. What does that mean? We can't even have coronavirus.
I heard someone call it the Kung Flu, which I really like.
Oh, yeah.
That is nice.
Hey, let's go. Sorry.
No, you go, Ben.
It goes to show just how easy people are manipulated, and their view of the masses. Just they're aware of the fact that they need to turn this into an issue of racism in order to control the dialogue around it. So they know that people are easily manipulated by this sort of social justice language.
Yeah, and I think that was what was scary for me, is I've got a son that's going to Sydney University. And, back in, what was it, late February, he was saying this poster's all up at Sydney Uni, saying that to link what was called the coronavirus back then, to link the coronavirus to China was racist.
Yeah.
And so, this is what influenced politicians in America, and in particular Italy, where, the breakout was severe, to go, and the mayor of, I think, Florence was asking people to go hug a Chinese day.
Yeah, that's right.
Racism.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi has got vision of her walking.
That didn't work out so well for Italy.
Encouraging people to go to Chinatown and hug, not just hug Chinese people, but to visit Chinese businesses. See, this is where the left has lost the plot.
And you know what this reveals? It reveals the absolute disdain that the elites have for Joe Public. That the elites are so convinced that we are all racists, that we all have such dark hearts, that we cannot be trusted to be civil to our neighbour unless the government give us the language to use, because we are so quick to demonize our neighbour according to the elites, and it's just a terrible insight into the way that they think of the public.
It's a way of controlling us as well, because once you frame an argument in racism terms, the moment you try to combat that or come back at that, you look like you're then defending racism, which is an unforgivable sin at the moment. So they do this to control the debate as well, where any sort of response or reaction or news that they don't want out there, they brand it as racism, and people buy it.
Can I jump in there? I think something that Ben and I have talked about, and this is... Oh, sorry, James, you're going to say something.
I was just going to say that the name Wuhan flu is not a racist term. It's a statement of fact.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with, once you start creating a narrative, facts get lost, then you can't talk with any intelligence about what's actually happening. And it's incredibly damaging.
Yeah.
Well, particularly for Queenslanders, I feel for them at this time. Sarcasm ahead, can I just say, in case you missed this. I find Ross River fever to be, grossly prejudiced against Queenslanders. Now, I blame Queenslanders for all these types of things. That's sarcasm, okay? It's crazy, This is really, really serious, that people follow that line.
Let's take this question from Joe Simard. What's the political rationale for Australia not withdrawing funding from the WHO, or is it timing, not to be seen following US blindly? Do you think, do you think there's a reason why we won't withdraw funding from the WHO, such as political correctness, or is it that we just want to look a little independent in our thought processes? Anybody? James, why don't you offer to answer that for Joe?
I think Joe has probably hit the nail on the head that the media so demonised Donald Trump that the last thing any other politician would want to be seen as doing is following Donald Trump's lead, even if you agree with it. Maybe give Trump a little bit of space and then make a decision so as not to be linked with him, just because the media will absolutely crucify you. On top of that, I think within our own political system, there's a lot of people who are globalists and who really do love the United Nations.
Yep. I was talking, and I won't say who, but I was talking to a senior politician this morning from the coalition, and he made a very good point here. I think it's courage. You've got to have courage to follow America's lead. I'm not sure if our Australian Treasurer has got that to make that bigger call. But the other side to this is, I think Trump's great strength here is he's doing to WHO and to China what he did to North Korea. He's calling their bluff. Now, we haven't had a politician that's done that for a long while, that's been willing to call out major dictatorships on their encroaching presence. You know, like, we've got to keep remembering China's got an expansionist policy here into the South China Sea. You know, like Andrew Hastie, for instance, has been saying for a long time now, and I think we've got to give that guy credit. He's been one of the few politicians, him and James Patterson, that have been saying, and he's got bipartisan support on this, on the committee that he chairs. But, you know, they've been building basically what you might say is unsinkable aircraft carriers with the, you know, coral atolls in the South China Sea. Now, that's a significant threat. I still cannot believe Andrew Robb oversaw the lease, the 99-year lease to the Port of Darwin. What on earth would justify that? And we got a measly $500 million for a 99-year lease, which completely compromises our national security and, as Andrew Hastie rightly says, our national sovereignty. Now, Andrew Hastie, for instance, has been warning Australia of this. If there is any good to come out of COVID-19, it's this. Australia and the world has woken up to WHO and to the CCP. Finally, I think everybody has said they can't be trusted. And we need to be aware of the international threat that they pose. They are not a global player. We assume that they're going to play by democratic Western rules. They're not. And the strength of Trump is he's taken his business tactics into the international political realm. He's willing to call out nations. It worked out well, I think, with North Korea. Time will only tell on what will happen with China. But with James, I think Trump has done the right thing with WHO, and it's just whether or not our own politicians have got the courage to follow suit.
When you talk about courage, and I think this goes to a greater malaise that our nation is facing, and that is that we have lost all cultural confidence. And we have demonised our own history to the point where now our national broadcaster typically talks about the fact that our country is illegitimate, built on stolen land. So we've completely undermined our own history. We have undermined our own morality, having said we don't want the Christian faith anywhere near the public square. We now have no objective morality, so we're not sure of anything anymore. And so So we're lacking all cultural confidence. So then we come to big issues in the world, and we're facing a communist regime which is very confident, or we're facing Islamist states who are incredibly confident. Meanwhile, we don't even believe in our own history, let alone our own reality. And so we are all at sea and unwilling to take a stand for anything, but very quick to apologise for everything because of a general lack of cultural confidence.
Oh, look, again, I think you've hit the nail on the head, James. Well, it was Orwell that said this, and you're almost quoting him. The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. Or, remember the more famous one that he had from 1984, he who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. Now, that's at the heart of our cultural malaise, is that the left has taken over our tertiary institutions, and history. Our history is being obliterated. We're now embarrassed and ashamed of our past, but we're still living off the fruit of it. That's the terrible tragedy that's happening at the moment.
And so we know in our heart of hearts what's right. I think most people do, but then we're filled with self-doubt, and we think to ourselves, who are we to tell the rest of the world how things should be? And it's not only to our own detriment, but it's to the detriment of the rest of the world that desperately needs Western values that are founded on a Judeo-Christian ethic.
Peter Williamson says, speaking of control, I wonder what whose exit strategy will be. What do you think? Now, we have a potential clue here from the ABC. Coronavirus lockdowns could end in months if Australians are willing to have their movements monitored. And James tweeted, allow the state to track your every movement and monitor who you associate with. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, can I just say, I don't think they have an exit strategy. I think they have an entrance strategy. That's what's scary, and that's what James is saying, right? See, Ben and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. We've known each other for a number of years, and I said, Ben, what's coming over the hill? Okay, the news is talking about this at the moment, but what are people not seeing that we need to be prepared for? And I'll let Ben comment on this further, but I think he put his finger right on the issue, and that is what's coming over the hill is forced vaccinations.
Absolutely.
That you won't be allowed to go back to work or send your child to school or go to the shops or enter into society until you receive the vaccine. So that's what. Now, think of the implications for this for civil liberties and freedom and conscience, freedom of conscience. This is going to be massive, but that's going to be the new normal. The new normal is civil liberties are going to be out the window. They start by saying, for instance, and I'll just say this and then I'll let Ben take over because I know he's got some strong thoughts on this, but they start with saying, over this Easter long weekend, stay at home. But my question is, so when can we go bushwalking again? Yep. When does it stop? When does this home detention cease? I get that there's a legitimate health concern, but no one's really explaining to me clearly what the exit strategy is. And that's because I don't think there is one. I think there's a growing encroachment of the state, and I think that's what James has so rightly put his finger on Twitter.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've seen the government grow, and because they've got their hands in the health system and in hospitals and whatnot, they almost have to respond. They almost have to do something. They're that big and they have that much control. They don't want the fallout to come back on them. And we've already seen the Prime Minister say that vaccines may be the key to loosening the restrictions that we have. I think it was Denmark. That there were politicians there who were pushing to have authorities given the right to essentially enter into your home and test you for fevers. This is something that officials in who have endorsed themselves. But we also heard about politicians want, I'm pretty sure it was Denmark, they wanted to mandate medication, basically. They want to mandate vaccines for people. The state wants to be the one to say, you're sick, you're ill, here's the cure, we're going to give it to you whether you consent or not. And they may, how they do that, we don't know, whether it's, you know, by force, or whether it's forcing our hand another way by saying, well, you can't send your kids to school, you can't visit a supermarket.
Can I just jump in there, Ben? I think there's an easy way they're going to do that, mate.
Yeah.
And that is, we've become very much a welfare state.
Yes.
I mean, people are joking, and it's not really a joke anymore. But the statement is, how's your free trial of socialism going?
Yeah.
Because we've gotten used to this incredibly generous handout system by the government, JobKeeper, JobSeeker. You know, I know some of the young people in my church, it's actually more financially benefit for them to not be at work and to receive government assistance. Now, that's a scary place to be. Now, what that'll mean with vaccinations is you don't get any of that government welfare payment until you sign up to the program, until you prove a vaccination record history. Now, can I just make one clarification, because I'll be really interested to hear what James has to say and others. But I'm not necessarily against vaccines per se, personally. For me, the issue is compelling the whole of society to do it. That's a whole new level of questioning civil liberties.
James?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. I believe that they will mandate vaccines for anyone travelling abroad, or in other words, to get a visa to go to another country. Surely Australia, once we get this under control, and a vaccine has been developed, surely our government will say, unless you've been vaccinated, you may not come into our country. I would have no problem with that. I would have no problem with America saying to me, James, you cannot come into America unless you've had the vaccine. Then I'm free to choose, what do I care more about, going to America or having the vaccine? And it's my choice. I think that's the way it will go. And I wouldn't have any problem with that. In fact, I would expect our government, if we can get this thing under control, to refuse entry to anyone who hasn't had a vaccine, should one be developed. That's different to what Mark has just alluded to, where within the country, every person must get the vaccine. I'm not sure that would be enforceable. But then again, 2 months ago, I didn't believe the government could tell you how many visitors you have in your own home. So, like I said.
It's incredible what's now enforceable, and I have it on good report that there is a great deal of pleasant surprise in the National Cabinet that Australians have so readily cooperated with the onerous impositions that have been put upon us. And I'm personally really worked up about this. I can't believe that we've given away all of these fundamental freedoms that tens, maybe hundreds of thousands, let's just say tens of thousands of Australian lives have been, and much more if we take into account the legal history we have from England and America. Many, many lives have been sacrificed to secure these freedoms, which government does not grant. They are natural, God-given freedoms: the freedom to assemble, the freedom to trade and commerce, the freedom of religion, the freedom of movement. All of these have been instantly given up because government experts told us there was a risk, a big risk, which has not proved to be real at all. There's not an epidemic in this country. There's not a health emergency in this country. We have 80 out of 2,200 beds currently occupied by these people, by coronavirus sufferers. These people, I don't know what that meant, but we have to have extreme sympathy for all of them, but at what cost? And it seems that the appetite for cost in Australia is very, very high. Our threshold for trusting government is very, very low.
What surprises me, Dave, is not the public's willingness to give the government power. I think that says a lot about the public. I think it says that we are people of good faith. I think it says that we are sensible. I think it says that we are committed to the common good more than our own self-interest. I think Australians' willingness to give and cede power to the government because of this crisis speaks well of the public. What I'm surprised at is the disdain that politicians and police have had for the public's good faith.
Yeah.
Now, every fine issued for breaking social distancing rules in Victoria is now being reviewed. Such is the overreach that police have used. The Twitter item you've just put up there, I believe, is the fine that someone in Victoria got when police visited their door and fined them for travelling some distance from their home to a holiday spot, only to later find the family had never left their home. They'd simply posted on Facebook photos of a holiday they had had months earlier.
Right.
This is a gross overreach of police power. Then in New South Wales, you've got the Premier telling everybody stay home for Easter, and 5 minutes later, one of her senior ministers jumping in his car and driving to his holiday home. It's not surprising that the public have ceded power to the government. That speaks well of us. What's surprising is the way the government have disrespected people's willingness to do that, and displayed a lack of good faith in return.
I actually disagree that it speaks well of us. I actually think it speaks poorly of our ability to think critically, think for ourselves, and I don't think ignorant compliance is helpful. Now, where exactly was it? Here we go. A little while ago, I asked people, would you be opposed to or support the states or federal government issuing fines for people who refused to get immunized against coronavirus? More than one in five people said they would support the states fining people who refuse to get fines, and a little bit more said they don't care. So 1 in 4 people are not opposed to the government forcing vaccination on us. Now, that's of my followers on Twitter and connected networks, people who you would think would have some things in common with me, a little more conservative, a little more on the side of small government. Imagine, I don't think this speaks well of us at all. I mean, it's nice. And, I've had people on my page arguing that we should trust Scott Morrison because he's a Christian. And I see the nice virtues in those sentiments, but they're confusing politicians with pastors. God does appoint our leaders, but that includes all of the bad ones in history as well. And it does not equate to a rubber stamp endorsement of whatever decisions they make. I think there's an article in this that maybe I should write of why we shouldn't trust Scott Morrison. And let me say, I want to love Scott Morrison. I want him to succeed. I pray for his success. And I believe he has a sincere, real relationship with Jesus. But he has not banned abortion. And the reason this is evidence that we can't just trust him blindly is because he doesn't get a blank check to do whatever he wants as Prime Minister. He's surrounded by advisors and political realities which to a large extent tie his hands and influence his decisions. I would hope that if he got to do whatever he wanted, if he was, Prime Minister for a day, that he would be able to ban the wholesale slaughter of innocent living humans in Australia. And yet he hasn't. And so we can't just trust that he's going to always do the right thing. We have to critique, assess, analyze, and I think it's not to our credit that we just trust the government for any reason. Everybody else's thoughts on that?
The question that needs to be asked as well is, from where do we derive our rights? Where do we get our freedoms? Where do we get our right to move about freely, to operate a business, to visit family? are these things that the government grants to us, provided certain qualifications, or are these inalienable rights that God has given us by virtue of us being made in his image, being human beings? And I think the readiness to allow the government to essentially say which rights you can have and which rights you can't have, I think that's troubling, because there are very few, if any, dictatorships or tyrannical regimes that implemented their crackdown on freedom in the name of let's do harm, let's hurt people, let's destroy the nation, and let's kill millions. It's always sold in the language of this is to benefit the people. I'm doing this for you, for your safety. And if you cultivate enough fear with the public, they will very freely give up the liberties that they have in order to feel safe. And I think we found that with this entire virus. There is enough fear there for people to think it's reasonable to essentially be placed under house arrest and threatened with big fines if you visit your family members, or if 11 people attend a funeral. Not only that, but just the sort of dependency we have on the state as well has been revealed, where there's a pandemic, and our first response is to call out to the government to save us. What's the government going to do to protect me? And then readily, yep, we'll do whatever you say, regardless of what liberties we have, as long as you can keep us safe. I find that troubling personally.
Further thoughts, Mark, James?
Let's not be too hard on the government. The government is responsible to keep citizens safe. If the government isn't keeping citizens safe, what are they there for? That's why we have border control. That's why we have funding of major public utilities. The government has a responsibility to serve the citizens, and primary in that is to keep us safe. Now, the government can't insulate us from everything, and here's the tension. How safe do we expect the government to keep us? Again, I think we've got to be careful not to paint the average Aussie as an ignoramus who's just willing to hand over freedoms because all he cares about is being cocooned. Let's give Australians a bit more credit. Australians have been told this is for a short time because of a major threat to our public health. And I think most Australians acting in good faith are willing to do this for a short time. But of course, now the media talk is, how long can this lockdown last? How do we get back to some semblance of normality? And that is where we'll find out whether Australians are acting ignorantly and just being willing to sleepwalk into totalitarianism, to be extreme, or whether Australians actually do have a brain and will require of the government, hey, we have given you a blank check, but it was always for a season. Now we expect things to return. And we're yet to see how that will play out.
But really, the government, their role is also to defend our freedoms. So rather, not just keeping us safe by removing those freedoms, but keeping us safe from people who would violate our freedoms. They keep us safe from criminals, because criminals violate our freedoms, our liberties. So, there really needs to be a line drawn here where the government says these are the rights that we can't encroach on, these are the rights that we will. At the moment, we're willing to tolerate the right, the government taking away our rights to see our family members, our rights to conduct a church service, and our rights to travel without an excuse that they deem reasonable. These are the things that the government really should be defending for us. These are the things that other generations have died to protect for our sake. And I think it's the fear of I'm not in control. I need to give that control to somebody else. We're largely a nation that's drifted quite far from Christianity, quite far from God. So the highest authority that we can conceive of is the state. And so we look to the state as almost a substitute for God. They will keep me safe so long as I obey their commands. I think it really reflects the worldview that many Australians have been adopted. Of course, not everybody's in that camp, but it is a large portion of the population, and I think everybody who voted in the same-sex marriage plebiscite demonstrated that. They demonstrated a rejection of any sort of absolute moral standard authority outside of the state itself. They said, no, these moral issues are going to be dictated now by the state or by the people telling the state what to do. It's that's the road we've gone down, and it's you can't function there. You can't function as a society, and I think we're seeing that.
I think this quote from Ben Franklin is perhaps not always understood in its full context and implications. And what it means to me, for the sake of whatever that's worth, is that we have a balance that we need to achieve. It's not wrong, and Ben Franklin didn't believe you should never ever give up any liberty. He was in favour of strengthening libel laws. So he clearly didn't think freedom of speech should be unlimited. So that he did believe in limits on liberty. And this quote here says, "They who can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." And so the question is in the balance, in the proportionality, which, James, you were speaking about, is, look, there are good reasons why we want to give up some freedoms. But the question then becomes, how big are those reasons? How big are the costs that we're trying to avoid? And how big are the costs that we're being asked to pay in return? I think all of us were probably happy to say, yeah, we agree with 1 meter, one person for every 4 square meters, and keep 1.5 meters apart, and maybe even compulsory temperature checks and frequent hand sanitizing before you go in and out of any establishment. Like, let's be really aggressive with physical distancing and personal hygiene. But when we were told that you could go to Kmart but not church, that's where I'm like, hang on, how many lives are at risk here? That doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense on a practical level. And I don't want to abdicate my reasoning faculties simply because the government said our health system could be overwhelmed, when the evidence is clear. Now, you need to provide evidence up front, not just a government expert, that we've got this huge risk of genocidal plagues on the nation. Like, I'm talking in excess of 10. For me, I think it would need to be more than 10,000 lives will certainly be lost. And that's probably too much detail to debate. That's probably an arbitrary number that's not helpful. But, this quote here, essential liberty. What are the essential liberties that we've given up? And have we given them up for temporary safety? Like, have we found, is this a once-off problem, or is there going to be a second wave of coronavirus transmissions during winter? How long? I mean, it's not going to be a minor price if we're giving this up for a year until an antidote is, or antidote, a vaccine is discovered. So, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, you've covered a lot of ground, and it's hard to know how to tackle that because you raise a number of points. I think let's start with the stats. Let's start with some evidence. Ben's done some good work on this in just putting together a chart on mortality rates for Australian society for, I think he did it last count for the month of March and into April. I'm wondering, Ben, if you could pull that up on the screen for people to see. And it just tracks on a daily basis how many people are dying in Australia from certain diseases. I think I'm not saying this is the end answer. I'm saying this is a really helpful graph to see where we are statistically now. So,
Mark, do you want that in Australia or America? Because I've got those from Ben.
We did the statistics for Australia. We've also done the statistics for America, but I think that Ben is putting up at the moment refers to our own situation. And obviously, percentage of population is a factor as well. So can you pull that up, Ben, for people to see in real time?
Yep, Dave's got it up now.
So if you go, so this is what it looks like for the month of March. So by the month of March, we had 29 deaths of people. Now, again, another debate that people are having, and I don't necessarily, it can get a bit complicated, is people dying with COVID-19 or from COVID-19. Let's just be generous in this and just say they died from it, all those 29 people. That number has since more than doubled into April. But if you put that in comparison then to, you know, the killers of heart disease, stroke, abortion, and cancer, it's worth keeping that all in mind. So I think, you know, we have. Please don't hear me, anybody out there in social media land, trying to minimise the danger that COVID-19 is. I think another thing I'd be good to discuss today is, you know, where did this virus come from? The other thing I think is got to be seriously asked questions is this just from seafood markets, from animal to human, or without going down the rabbit hole of conspiracies too much, is there a human element to this as well? Has this virus been somehow manipulated or modified in Chinese laboratories, which seems to me, you know, highly suspicious when, you know, you've got your only military grade lab in China is in Wuhan. You know, now I'm not saying this is deliberately, you know, put out by the Chinese Communist Party. It seems to me, at least my opinion, and that's all it is, an opinion, is that this is a virus that has escaped from a Chinese lab and has entered into the Chinese society and then into the world. For me, the real concern here is, though, that the Chinese government has covered it up and it hasn't played its global responsibility in warning the world as to the extent, the seriousness, and who's complicit in this as well, I think. Anyway, I've probably said enough to get the discussion started into a whole new sphere. I can see James is smiling there. He's probably chomping at the bit.
No, actually, when you said perhaps it started in a Chinese laboratory, I thought you said lavatory for a second.
What are your thoughts, James?
Practices seem to be quite equivalent, it seems, at wet markets.
James, your thoughts on some of, I guess, the pushback on your previous thoughts?
I think graphs like the one we showed are very interesting, and you see, compared to other causes of death, coronavirus is almost not worth comparing. My understanding of what the government is trying to do is the government is simply trying to get the health system to a point where it will be overwhelmed with people needing intensive care and ventilators. The government action is not to try to eradicate coronavirus. I don't think anyone really believes that. It's simply to buy some time to get the health system up to speed. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so I think sometimes when you compare this many people died of cancer in March compared to this many people with coronavirus, that's an easy statistic to say, you know, it's crazy we're doing all of this for just a small group of people. I think you've got to keep in mind that bigger policy.
Can I just jump? Can I just jump in? I want to say I'm actually a bit more with James here on. I'm very supportive of the government's response. So as a pastor, I want to keep emphasising to God's people the verses in 1 Timothy 2, verses 1 to 3, that we need to be praying for our government. Definitely, as all Australians, I think we need to be, like you said before, Dave, honouring the King, particularly when our King at the moment, our Prime Minister, is a genuine Christian believer. With James, please don't hear me when I say, let's start with the statistic. I'm definitely not saying let's end there. COVID-19 is a serious, serious illness. And part of the thing here, and James picked up on this, and it's worth acknowledging, is, there are in Australia, just over before this pandemic broke, 2,000 ventilators in the whole of Australia. 2,000. Now, I think the government has been right to say, if this goes out, our health system cannot cope. Now, part of the issue I have here too is reports from the Sydney Morning Herald. Now, these are mainstream media outlets talking about how many of our medical supplies have been shipped back to China. That's a serious question that I think we need to consider. So many of our pharmaceuticals, for instance, like antibiotics, are manufactured either in China or India. That's another thing that we need to consider, is actually securing our own pharmacological resources. These are not conspiracy theories. These are just realities that I think we need to acknowledge and we need to consider. The other larger issue here is, and I know that people are talking about, is, well, the development of vaccines and the Gates Foundation. I know Ben might have some thoughts on this, but this is a very complicated and it's a situation. And can I just want to say, for the record, I think it's a very serious health threat. Like with James, I don't think the Australian public are mugs. I think we have been, for the large part, good citizens in submitting to our government like the Bible says that we should. And I think we are to be commended for that. I don't think we've just given up our rights, our freedoms as lemmings falling off a cliff. I think we've tried to do it as good citizens. The question and the challenge will be now getting those freedoms back. And my only concern is just how this is going to play out into the future. So, can I say again, I do think the Australian public is to be commended, and I think the Australian government is to be commended. But I'm just concerned, and I'm increasingly concerned as to how this is going to play out. That's
another aspect that people aren't really discussing. What's this going to look like in 3 months when the bills start piling up and people aren't allowed to go to work? And is the outcome of placing everyone under house arrest and banning them from earning money and going to their jobs, is the result of that going to be worse than it would have been otherwise? It also assumes, I'm not saying the Australian public are mugs either, but I think there's a response that we need the government to dictate what we can and can't do in an aspect that is assuming the Australian people are mugs. They don't know how to social distance responsibly. Like Mark Latham said, politicians can go and sit in Parliament responsibly, but you Christians are too stupid. You can't sit in church without infecting each other. The assumption there is that as the Australian public cannot do this properly. There are a few people who are violating these restrictions, which I think should only be advice, and therefore everybody is under house arrest. We're going to punish you all because of the actions of some. That's the issue I have. That is what I think treats the Australian people like they're idiots.
Well, you make a very strong point. And that's that's the other side to the argument here. Okay, I mean, my oldest son's looking at getting married this year, and it's causing my wife no end of grief that, you're allowed 10 people to go to a funeral and 5 people to go to a wedding, and how many people can go to the hairdressers? Why don't we sort of,
Harvey Norman. Yeah.
Great news. Think of how much money you'll save.
Don't say that to my wife, darling. If you're listening, don't listen to James right now.
Hey, gentlemen, let me ask you all. We're approaching an hour right now. Are you happy to keep going and start unraveling another can of worms, or are we coming to a natural conclusion? Your time limits. What's the panel think?
Just quickly, Dave, I've got to say with regards to Ben's comment that because a few people don't know how to social distance. We're all now bearing the brunt of that. But isn't that the story of the coronavirus? Because one idiot ate a bat, we're all bearing the brunt of his stupidity.
Yeah, well, and well, the story of that is that the is also truly about the WHO saying, "Hey, what's wrong with the wet markets? They're an important part of," or the Chinese government saying, "We can't shut them down; it's out of our control," while they build artificial reefs in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, my question now is, who believes who anymore? You know, like that's the big story to come out of COVID-19. But look, just to clarify your question, you're asking, can we go on? Happy to go on. Maybe your listeners or everybody that's listening can just say, you know, what do you guys think? You want us to go on? In particular, if you want us to go on, please write your comments in on what areas do you think we're missing or overlooking right now.
Yeah. Now, one of the topics that we could talk about, but feel free to suggest anything, is the Get Pell campaign. So Mark's actually written a great piece on that. But if you've got another topic that you'd like us to chat about,
just quickly on that, can I just say, it seems to me that, you know, the great irony here is, you know, the Love is Love campaign, which had their argument, which wasn't an argument, it was just a slogan or a mantra, or a slogan that became a mantra, is love, and they tried to even justify this at points incredibly, that from the Bible, that, you know, that famous incident, which a lot of people don't realize is, you know, not in the earliest manuscripts of the Bible, from John chapter 8 of the woman caught in adultery. But even if it is in the Bible, you know, even if it is part of sacred scripture, right? That was their only argument to say, well, you know, that him who is without sin cast the first stone. Now, there's two things to say here. Number one, I think the Pharisees that Jesus was rebuking I think he was calling them out on their own hypocrisy, because, you know, for the woman to have been stoned, you need to bring the man that she was guilty of committing adultery with. They needed to be there together. So they were actually breaking the law. So Jesus is saying, look, you can't condemn this woman because what you're doing is fundamentally unjust. But here's the other side to it. What the Australian media and large sections of it, like The Guardian, like the Sydney Morning Herald, and in particular the ABC, and for everybody that's watching, if you haven't seen Greg Sheridan's piece this morning in The Australian, I think it's a stunning piece calling out the ABC. The problem is our Australian media have acted like Pharisees themselves. You know, Powell was exonerated 7-0 by the Supreme, or by the High Court of Australia, our supreme authority in this land. And yet here you've got Daniel Andrews saying, my only comment is going to be, I believe all victims. Now, that's incredible for a premier to say, for two reasons. Number one, the biggest question is, does the Premier of Victoria then, is he saying that he undermines the High Court of Australia's ruling? That's a very, very serious allegation or statement to make. And he's had to rightly, his department has backed away going, oh, no, we're not saying that. Well, come on, mate. Everybody else in Australia knows that's what you really mean. You disagree with what the High Court has unanimously said in declaring Pell's innocence. But the other side to this is even, I think, more serious, and that is, what if I am, again, can I put the caveat in, if this is being recorded and everybody's seeing this, I'm being facetious, but Daniel Andrews abused me as a child. Well, okay, I'm a victim now. Daniel, you have to believe me, because it's believe all victims. All victims, I hear you, I see you, I believe you. Now, this should strike fear into the heart of every Australian, because that has just undermined our justice system. No longer is a person innocent until they are proven guilty, but as soon as an allegation is made, you are guilty until you can prove that you're innocent. And the problem is, the ABC doesn't like you, you will remain guilty for all time. This is, I'd really like to hear James on this as a former journalist, because the unprofessionalism of journalists in Australia here is just stunning. People like Louise Milligan, who wrote a hit piece on Pell, that is still a #1 bestseller on Amazon, by the way. How could, now, regardless of the Catholic Church, this was, like Pell said, this was not a referendum on the Catholic Church. This was a hit piece, a witch hunt, a media witch hunt on Pell. This was a Get Pell campaign.
Yep.
And I think what is so unfair on this is that this is one person making an allegation out of the plethora, the whole mob of other people that were there those days, those Sundays, that said never happened. And you got the uncorroborated testimony of one person compared to all the testimony of everybody else. And how could the Victorian courts and the Court of Appeal have upheld this conviction? Serious questions have to be asked here of the justice system in Victoria. Sorry, I've gone on a bit too long here. Over to you guys. But I just think this stinks to high heaven.
James?
I agree with Daniel Andrews' tweet. Victims, we believe you. Victims, we hear you. Victims, we see you. I agree 100% with Daniel Andrews. But let's talk about how we ascertain who and who is not a victim. We have a court process to decide who is a victim and who is simply a person making an allegation.
Yep.
We don't believe every allegation, but of course we believe every victim. Daniel Andrews is too clever by half. The High Court, thank God, unanimously reaffirmed our right to a fair trial.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have become really upset about this, but the fact is the High Court's decision was incredibly important because what they have guaranteed, again, is a citizen's right to the benefit of reasonable doubt when being prosecuted by the state. Now, a lot of people don't like this, and I understand why, because the criminal burden of proof is quite high. But you only appreciate that when an allegation is being made against you. It's not a principle, but it's the principle most compatible with our desire to have a free and civil society. And what is unbelievable to me is that people are applauding the destruction of our collective rights, not out of principle, but out of blind hatred towards one individual. That to me is a frightening thing. Because people so hate George Pell and the Catholic Church, they are willing to defile our court system and in so doing, even their own rights to a fair trial.
Sorry, Ben, you go.
I was just going to say, it really does seem agenda-driven. I think it was Andrew Bolt who said there were Victorian police brought 26 charges against him, 26, and now they're trying for another. It really does seem there's something else driving this, especially given the High Court's decision. You don't carry on like that. There's been allegations brought against Labor MPs before, but you don't see the pile. You don't see that same pylon. It's totally about who he is and what he represents.
Yeah.
And look, I think to be fair to Pell, he's acknowledged the Catholic churches. And look, can I just say, full disclosure here, I grew up as a devout Catholic. And like anybody who's left the Catholic Church, it's like an ex-alcoholic. If you're on the wagon, you tend to be more critical of alcohol as an ex-alcoholic. I personally am more critical of Catholicism than most people, right? But to credit where credit's due, Pell was the first Catholic leader to tackle the child abuse pandemic, you might even say, within the Catholic Church, right? That was a major problem, and I think credit where credit's due, he's tackled it, right? I think what the media hate is they just hate that Pell's a conservative. He's been against abortion. He's been against same-sex marriage. This has been a media pylon to get Pell.
Yeah.
And that's what's really, really scary is, okay, I think I agree 100% with everything James has said. There's no but coming. What concerns me is how the ABC reported the verdict after it came through.
So true.
Because you could hear crickets.
Yeah.
And you've got Lee Sales up in arms, almost hysterical on Twitter, going, "Oh well, I approached Pell for an interview and he's declined. How horrible is that?" Like blind Freddie could see that. Why would you be interviewed by Lee Sales? You're not going to get a fair go.
Yep.
Even Jesus
She's been calling him a pedophile for the last 12 months. Sorry, Jane.
I was going to say, even Jesus wasn't crucified twice. Why would Pell want to go on the ABC, having already been crucified by the courts?
Yeah, so true. Hey, look, let's finish up with a topic that gives honour to the fact, as I've teasingly prompted in one Facebook group, that we've brought the editor-in-chief of Cauldron Pool out of the shadows for only his second ever appearance in front of a camera, I believe, live streaming, both times on the place where you will get the scoops, Pellowe Talk. And let's talk about the rise of websites like Cauldron Pool, which Ben Davis is editing. What exactly, on the wake of the Pell example, maybe this is a rhetorical question and the answer is obvious, but the democratization of media, you called it before, Mark. Why exactly are independent, viewer-funded alternative media channels and sources more important than ever?
Oh, gee, I think that's a great question. But just before I go into it, can I just say, if you haven't checked out Cauldron Pool, you really should. It breaks so many stories so much more quickly than a lot of the mainstream media. And in fact, once you start looking at Cauldron Pool, you'll start seeing this uncanny coincidence that occurs with the mainstream media starting to, lift ideas and angles. The other thing you should know about Cauldron Pool is I think, and I'm not just saying this because Ben's a friend, but I think Ben is one of the leading political cartoonists and illustrators in Australia. So any of the artwork or digital media that you're seeing there, it's all him. So not only is the editor-in-chief, he's the artist-in-chief as well. And so, Ben does work, not just for there, but for The Spectator. Okay, that's enough of a free plug for Ben. You can pay me later.
Oh, well.
But the issue is why, one of the things that strikes me about Ben is, how long's Cauldron Pool been going for? 3 years?
End of 2017, perhaps. Early 2018. Yeah.
So, the interesting thing is just how many people are following it. So, like The Spectator Australia, another really good conservative news source, on Facebook has about 7,000 people following, whereas interestingly, you've got people like Ben. Ben, how many followers have you got now? Over 20,000?
Yeah. But the traffic to the website is what was totally unexpected. Hundreds of thousands a month.
Yeah, I think you've had over 9 million eyeballs over the last 3 years.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the rise of social media and more people given access to the internet. Whereas before, people's primary news sources and source of information were limited to who could afford to put a news network together on television or get a newspaper printed or a magazine printed. But I think with social media and the internet, it has freed that up and given people access to other people who may not be funded by corporations or whatnot. So I think that goes hand in hand with it, and the growing disappointment with mainstream media and the people's ability to just see through the manipulation, know when they're getting lied to, because it's so easy now. And I think this is something that Trump's done well, is he's really brought to the forefront the whole concept of the news presenting distorted stories in order to advance their message, their particular agenda, and just how effective that's been as a propaganda tool for whatever political party they're pushing. So I think the more people see the mainstream media manipulating them, the less faith they have in it. So it is natural for people to want to look elsewhere. Not only that, but the whole point of Cauldron Pool is we're also publishing a lot of stuff that the mainstream media don't, that we think deserve more attention.
I'll just say the other thing too is, and I hope this is not offensive to somebody like James, who I think is an old school journalist and very good, but can I just say a lot of journalism today is pretty rubbishy. Like reading a lot of journalist stuff, they're just not well read, particularly when it comes to religion. The amount of biblical illiteracy in our society is just stunning. Take, for instance, Peter von Enselen over at The Australian. Now, he's deputy editor, professor of, something and other, I forget now, over at the university in Western Australia.
Feminist dance theory, I think, Mark.
Yeah, it may as well be, because when he writes on religion, and look, he went to Scots College, which is a Presbyterian college, and for all of you who have, I just want to apologise, because we obviously didn't. I'm a Presbyterian minister, and his theological training at Scots College was just, just dismal. During the same-sex marriage campaign, he makes statements that get published even, and how this gets past an editor is just beyond me. But that the Bible, the New Testament never talks about hell. Yeah. And I'm thinking, you clearly have never cracked open a Bible. You've clearly never read the words of Jesus. So I think a large part of why places like Cauldron Pool get published is, Ben and I, for instance, and I'm not just blowing our own trumpet here, but we're not dumb people. We've got a couple of, postgraduate degrees in, theology and other topics. I think we look at a lot of the stuff that's on the media and is being reported, and we think, we could do a better job of that ourselves. We've read widely. We talk to a lot of different people. Now, with the democratization of media and we live in an information age. You can access a lot of information yourself through the net, and then it just takes a degree of courage to publish. I remember, I'm not endorsing this statement completely, but I think it was Hemingway that said the key to being a good writer is always having a fresh pair of underwear and a bottle of whiskey. In other words, you've just got to have the gumption at some points to stick your neck out and be shot at. And I think that, to me, goes to a large part of why the popularity of places like Cauldron Pool. And can I just say places that you should check out is like the Canberra Declaration, which has even 30,000 followers. Now, these are things that are not, these are not for profit. People aren't going around making heaps of money out of this. They just care about truth.
So
that's exactly where it began. It was in response to some articles that were published on the ABC that were talking about the Christian view of homosexuality, and the response that we gave, and this is why we created the site, was the response we gave was, you can say you don't agree with Jesus on his views on homosexuality, but don't pretend he didn't have an opinion on it. Don't pretend the Bible was silent on these subjects. Don't try and distort the Bible. Say you don't believe the Bible, you don't agree with it, but don't pretend it's on your side. So a lot of it was just responding to this sort of mischaracterization of the Bible.
The very first article we wrote together, Ben and I were whinging to each other because we'd read this hit piece by Julia Baird. It was a 12-month expose on domestic violence within the major faiths of religion, and in particular, Christianity. And get this is Julia Baird, one of the chief journalists at the ABC, a 12-month special investigation. I'd like to get James's response to this. She's getting paid to do research for 12 months. Her only academic source is one paper, which she misquotes.
Yeah.
Now, if you had done that at university or even at high school, you'd written a paper for 12 months, and this is a national platform, mind you.
Yep.
And you misquote the one reference that you have. So, and a misquote was this. It's very significant. I'll just remind people of this. It was that she had said that Protestant men who go to church sporadically are the worst abusers of women in society, and those that attend an evangelical Protestant church regularly are only slightly less likely or to abuse their wives. Now, what stunned me about that is I knew the reference because I'd studied this. I knew the reference, and I knew that the quote that she was lifting was actually said the opposite. Wow. It said that if you were an evangelical Protestant man that believed in what they call complementarianism, that there are equality of roles, but also equality of persons, difference in roles in a relationship, historic mainline traditional Christianity, in other words, then you were the least likely of anyone in all of society to abuse your wife. And I said to Ben, this is appalling. How can they get away with this? And the reason they get away with this is because the ABC won't give you a platform to reply. So I said to Ben, we've got to reply to this. And so that's really in a large part how Cauldron Pool and other places started developing, and why we felt such a burden to do it is because it was really a matter of truth and of factual accuracy. So for me, and I'd like to hear James on this too, I just think the journalistic standard in this country and throughout the world has really slipped. You know, people are getting their information more from Twitter than they are from genuine research.
James, have a chat to us as we bring this to the close in the next few 5 to 10 minutes at the most. But what do you think about the standard of modern journalism, the need for independent viewer-funded journalism outside of corporations and taxpayer-funded broadcasters, etc., and maybe with specific reference to the Julia Baird story or the Pell story, if you like?
We began by talking about Peter Van Onselen, and I think whenever Peter Van Onselen speaks about Christianity, he simply demonstrates that being a professor of public policy is very different to being a professor of theology. It's true what Mark has said, that most journalists know very little about religion, but even worse, most journalists find it incomprehensible that people actually take religion seriously.
Yeah.
They cannot understand with Muslims that Muhammad and the Quran actually really does drive them. They keep insisting that Islamic extremism must be to do with lack of internet access or poverty or some sort of geopolitical agenda, because they simply can't comprehend that they really do believe their religion. And the same is true for the Christian faith. The media can't believe that we actually take it seriously, and so keep ascribing other motives. The other interesting thing about the media, and we were talking about this when it came to the George Pell acquittal and the way the media reported it, is because journalists now continually give opinion. And when I was working for News Limited, you were there simply to report what happened, not to give your slant on it. One of the things that really annoys me continually is every journalist's favourite adjective, disgraced, and then the name of the person. The word disgraced, before introducing the person about who the article is referring to, is editorialising. Journalists aren't supposed to editorialise. They are supposed to simply report the news dispassionately. But reporters don't do that. They continually editorialise, and every reporter, particularly on the ABC, was saying that George Pell was as guilty as sin. So is it any wonder then that the reporters are choking on their own tongues, having to report his acquittal? Because it's not just that they are reporting George Pell is acquitted, they are reporting that they themselves have been wrong this entire time. And no one wants to do that. And so that's the big problem with journalists, is that George Pell's acquittal is no longer a news story, it's actually personal, because they have become so invested in it themselves. And that investment prevents unbiased, dispassionate reporting.
And I totally agree. It's a great point, James. And we know that the media is no longer reporting the news, they're giving their interpretation. It's very postmodern. There's no truth except my truth, my my presentation of the truth. And I think that's what Ben and I are trying to do, is we're trying to say no. There's absolute truth. And again, I just want to reaffirm what you said too. The media is not reading biblical texts; they're not reading religious texts. They're unfamiliar with it. I heard you speak recently, James, and I thought you made an excellent point. And that is at the Church and State conference that Dave organised, that, the Harambe story, where, the gorilla was shot, and how the media outrage and the volumes of ink and news space that was spread to that in comparison. And I'd love for you to pick up on this and explain it even further. The young African man that was beheaded by Islamists, got no coverage at all. We don't even know his name. Even I, to this day, even though I heard you speak and talk about it, still don't know about his name and his witness. It's that they're selective in what we're told as well.
Yeah, I mean, the media certainly control what we focus on and what we do not. And the example you've raised, Harambe, the silverback gorilla in, I think it was Cincinnati Zoo, who was shot, that was all over the news. But the beheading of Matthew Aerga for his faith in Jesus on the beach of Tripoli by ISIS thugs was almost ignored. And certainly in comparison to the gorilla, Matthew Aerga may well have not existed. But I mean, it's much more palatable to report on the death of a gorilla, because that doesn't open up a can of worms like what ISIS were doing and who they were doing it to. ISIS were killing Christians deliberately, not worshippers or Easter worshippers, as Obama liked to call them. ISIS were killing Christians. But that then means you've got to start to look at, well, why are they killing Christians, and what is it about the Islamic faith that encourages some Muslims to do that? And they're not questions we want to talk about, because then we've got to take religion seriously, and we would rather just push it to the fringe and concentrate on novelty items such as the death of a gorilla.
Yep. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll just run around the panel. Any final thoughts, words, comments, questions you want to contribute to this conversation before we say sayonara?
I think it's been great. I think we should do it again. I think next time, I think a good discussion that we should do is actually exploring, I think, and I'm just seeing it from the comments of viewers, we should really talk about Trump and the rise of Trump. What is it that he is doing that is resonating with people?
Yep.
And now I'm not trying to go pro or anti. I'm just saying I think looking at the comments of people today, I think that's something worth exploring and discussing.
I'm not pro or anti-Trump. I'm pro good government, justice, peace, liberty. These are the things that God calls good government. And so I use the phrase undecided voters. That's what we need to tell politicians we are. That's what we need to sincerely be, is undecided. We need to approach every politician, whether they look like us, believe like us, or not. We need to say, I'm an undecided voter, and if you really represent the issues that I think are critical, if you do good government the way the Bible says, justice, liberty, and peace, then you're probably going to get my vote if you're the only one. And if you're not, we can talk about lesser issues. But Trump certainly is doing a lot of things that are very courageously Christian. Now, that doesn't mean he's a Christian character. He's certainly got a lot of character flaws, and we need to be critical of those as honestly as we're praising good Trump. Ben Shapiro frequently has that segment, Good Trump, Bad Trump, because he's a mixed bag. So whether it's a politician we like or a politician we don't like, we have to be honest either way. I think that'll be a great discussion, Mark.
The irony about Trump is he's not a Christian, and yet he's happy to call Easter and Christmas. He's not going to say Easter worshippers. Whereas Obama and Clinton they're claiming to be Christian. That's what people need to remember. They're claiming to be Christian. And
so did Kevin Hart before he opposed the biblical definition of marriage in a campaign. And this is a classic example of why I say don't vote for a Christian, meaning the identity politics sense of it. We want to vote for Christian values in government, not for Christian identities in government.
And can I just say, I'm looking at Sharon Cousins' comment now. Trump calls out fake news. He's not afraid of media. He works it. It's a great point, Sharon. And I mean, can I just say, Dave, credit to you. I think that's what Pellowe Talk's doing, isn't it? It's calling out fake news. It's just saying, look, this is the place you can get honest, open discussion. It's democratization of media. You won't get given this platform in the mainstream, but you can hear it here.
Yep. Ben, James, thanks for joining us. Any final words?
Yeah. Definitely what Mark was saying. I think that's a good thing to explore. Also, it'd be good to talk about sometime the worldviews and the assumptions that drive a lot of the things that are going on, the way that the country is being directed. I think we look at it in a very shallow way, the immediate effects and how it makes us feel, policies and whatnot. But I think getting to the heart of that assumption and really examining people's worldviews for inconsistencies, which I think we don't do as well as past generations. We don't really challenge people's assumptions, their presuppositions that are driving their beliefs and causing them to hold the beliefs they have and make the decisions they have. That was entirely absent from the whole marriage debate. There was absolutely nothing even on Christians challenging, well, what's your moral authority? We were just told what moral things were and what moral things were not. I think we would do far better to go back to, well, you want to talk about morality, define your standard. And that's what is entirely lacking, I think, from a lot of these moral discussions.
Yep. James?
I think between the four of us, we've solved most of the problems of the world. And thank you to Pellowe Talk for getting us through another one of our self-isolated, socially distant, quarantined, curfewed, sheltered-in-place days.
Hey, audience, we're experimenting with times. Does before lunch work? Does afternoon work? When do you think we're going to get the most people able to join in, participate, and engage? I know a lot of broadcasts are done live in business hours, some of the biggest and best ones. So I'm hoping it works because it's more convenient for me than family time in the evening, but that's prime time on TV. So I don't know if that translates, but we love doing this live, love the opportunity to engage with as many of you as possible. And so thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time investment out of your busy days in working from home. Yeah, it's been great. And I definitely look forward to doing it again real soon as we can lock it in.
Cheers.
All right, that's it for Pellowe Talk and Pellowe Talk live panel. And we look forward to seeing you in the further comments. Share this with your friends, invite people, follow the panelists on Twitter. Those details have been up throughout and are in the video description as well. And we will see you in the next live panel from Pellowe Talk. Bye for now.